Hello, and welcome back to my series of nightmare transactions. I hope that you have found this series helpful. Today I'm going to talk about final walkthroughs, which I have to say, when I was coming up with items to talk about in various categories, title work, appraisal, that type of thing, I found that this list actually was the longest of all of them. So this first story that I'm going to tell you is actually two different stories, and I'm going to talk about how they were different from one another and why it's important with that final walkthrough to make sure that you are getting an opportunity to do it. So there was a transaction where the seller was moving out of state. They moved all their stuff, pulled out of town the night before. The next morning, the buyer shows up for the final walkthrough, and lo and behold, when they disconnected their refrigerator, the water line had broke and poured water on those hardwood floors all night long. They were able to get the problem resolved prior to closing. Well, they weren't able to make the repairs, but they were able to come up with a solution that both parties felt comfortable with moving towards closing. It's why it's so incredibly important as a buyer that you get the chance to have that final walkthrough. Well, I have another scenario. This particular couple, I helped them sell their home, and they actually ended up buying a home in a different area with a different realtor. In this scenario, they kept asking for an opportunity to do a final walkthrough, and the sellers kept coming up with one excuse after another after another. Well, when you go to closing, you sign a document that says, I am accepting the house as is in its current condition. They went to closing. They did not get an opportunity to do a final walkthrough. They also had a water line break situation, but in this particular situation, it ruined close to 2/3 of the flooring in the home that had to be ripped up and redone. My guess is, when all was said and done with that there was probably some legal action that was taken if the sellers didn't come back and handle that situation and take care of the flooring, since it was an issue that happened before closing. But even still, that's why you have to see the home as the buyer, so you have an opportunity to see what repairs were done and if there was any damage that was caused that wasn't there when you went under contract. It's so incredibly important. I have another scenario. This one was a doozy, let me tell you. When I think about nightmare transactions, whoo, this one's kind of up there. I was the list agent on this particular home. I had the seller, and we really, really struggled when it came to negotiating the TRR. That's your treatment, repairs, and replacements. They came in with the inspector. The inspector had quite a bit to say, and then they submitted their requests based on that. Well, the buyer and seller really didn't agree completely on everything that the inspector had to say. And the seller was calling and talking with some professionals. The buyer was calling and talking with professionals, and they seemed to disagree on what was actually happening in the home. We ended up coming to terms on that TRR. It was so intense. We went back and forth so many times, and we crossed out and initialed and crossed out and initialed. I ended up rewriting the entire thing on a new page and referenced, the original, because I couldn't even tell where we were at with all of it. That is how much that we went back and forth on that particular negotiation for the repairs specifically. Well, it came time for the final walkthrough. All repairs had been made in accordance with what was agreed on in the TRR. The buyers went for the final walkthrough, and they had a reinspection done. I didn't hear anything. I thought, okay, this is great. Well, several hours later, in fact, it might have even been the next day, I don't remember, but there was quite a bit of time in between. I was contacted by the buyer's agent that the buyers were not happy and that they were considering, maybe not closing, and they wanted the seller to pay an additional $2,500 towards their closing costs because they wanted to make some repairs in a different way. It was a very tricky situation. They never ended up putting anything in writing to me to be able to present to the seller. And so they ended up closing. I called my title company and I said, hey, do you guys still have this scheduled for today? Have you heard that this closing, maybe isn't going to happen? And she said, nope, as far as we know, we're headed towards closing. And so again, because they never put anything in writing to me making a request to have that $2,500. We never ended up doing anything with it, and they decided to close. It is a very tricky situation, and my heart did go out to the buyer. I understood why they were frustrated with the situation. However, I always tell people it is very important when you are going under contract that you treat it as a legal binding contract, because it is. Every portion of it is, including the supplements that get added to the contract. In this scenario, the TRR was a legal binding contract. I really believe in my heart of hearts that the buyers just really ended up not being happy with what they agreed to. However, if you do not feel comfortable with something, don't agree to it, because once you've agreed to it, now you've put in writing what you are willing to accept. And at that point in time, it can get very tricky as to, how you move forward, because you've said yes. So always keep that in mind when you're agreeing to anything, if any part of the contract, that you need to make sure that you feel 100% comfortable with it moving forward. Another scenario that was maybe, kind of a little bit more minor, but we were doing a final walkthrough. You're just inspecting with your eyes what you can see, and you're relying on invoices that are, offered. Well, this situation, the buyer reached up and went to go open the microwave door, and because it was a built-in, and the handle just completely came off. The seller, it had happened, after inspections, and the seller decided to put some kind of gorilla glue type thing on it. So we were sitting at the closing table. I'm at the title company writing up a supplement that the seller is going to give the buyer, X amount of dollars so that she can go and get that microwave replaced. So again, maybe not a huge nightmare, but when you're closing, you really want things to go as smoothly as possible. So any little thing can really be an issue. Another situation that I went through. So in the contract, there is a portion that talks about everything that is meant to stay with the property. And then underneath that, there's a place where you can write anything extra that you want to stay and anything extra that you want to make sure that they take. Well, we had written in a few different things, or the buyer had asked me to write in a few different things, a refrigerator and a microwave, and I don't remember what all else, but I suppose maybe the seller just didn't understand, because when we went to go do the final walkthrough, the stove was missing and the curtains were missing. Well, both of those items are listed in the paragraph up above that shows all of the things that are meant to stay with the home. So I reached back out to the listing agent. I was like, hey, did you know that they took these items? And so before closing, the seller had to bring those items back because they were under contract to leave them in the home. So it's really important, number one, that you know everything that's meant to stay in the home. And that number two, if it's something that is an issue for you that you want to make sure that you take, that you go ahead and take those down either before photos, or that you make sure to write something in the broker remarks that says, hey, seller reserves, fill in the blank. A situation I had one time is a seller that had an antique lighting fixture in their entryway passed down from grandma. They wanted to make sure to take it with them, and so they put that in the broker remarks. I will say this, however, if it is not in writing, it is not real. So just because it's in the broker remarks, just because it's in the public remarks, if it's not in the contract, it's not real. They don't have to do it. So make sure, if it's something that's really important to you, that not only does it get discussed, but it gets written into the contract that everyone will sign. Again, as always with these, I am just picking out a few different scenarios that I've seen over the years where we've had issues. There are so many more. And it's incredibly important when you're hiring a realtor that you hire somebody that knows what to do when these things arise. My name is Esther Foley. I'm a local realtor to Owasso, Oklahoma. I would love to help you on your next purchase or the next time that you decide to list a home. Please give me a call or send me a text. As always, if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe for more. Thanks so much and have a great day.